Coming to paperback and e-readers, the Steam Season of the Witch Girl. The aspiring angel takes on a wicked teenage witch in this action-packed all-new Steam series adventure. Pre-order your copy of the Steam Season of the Witch Girl at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about anime in the 2000s. Now, I did a previous video about anime in the 1980s and 1990s, and I talked about many of the shows I grew up watching, like G-Force, which is known as Science Team Gatchaman, Voltron, which is known as Go Lion and Dairugger 15, and shows like Robotech. I mean, these were the shows that I basically grew up with in the 1980s as related to dubbed over and adapted animes. And the viewer basically wants me to start talking about animes that came out in the 2000s. Now, I really don't know that much about animes in the 2000s because I was going through a really rough period in my life. I had lost a job at AmeriCorps Vista with the Strive program, and then 9/11 happened, and then I wound up losing a job at a law firm after 2 weeks. So I spent a lot of the 2000s basically dealing with a lot of issues as related to depression and anxiety after losing those two jobs and then still trying to find another job. So I really was not that heavily focused on looking at animes because I just did not have the money at the time to be able to invest in cable or be able to buy the tapes to watch these type of shows. So my knowledge is really limited to basically what was on platforms like Kids WB as related to its Toonami block of programming that came on after they did their Kids WB block in about 2001, I believe, because that's when they stopped running shows like Batman Beyond and Pokemon and stopped running them under the Kids WB banner and started to move over into another banner of platform. I believe it was either called Toonami from Kids WB, and then eventually what we started to see was that Fox also stopped running animated programming as related to its block, where it was running Spider-Man and X-Men and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and then what we saw was them running things under the 4Kids TV platform. I believe WB and Fox both ran it under 4Kids TV, and that's where we started to see anime programming starting to replace the regular programming from American cartoon makers, stuff like Animaniacs, Batman, the animated series, X-Men Evolution, and Static Shock, and the Batman were moved so that we could see more anime-type programming. And these anime programmings basically really started in the late 90s with Pokemon. And as Pokemon started to become more popular, many of these networks basically started to think they could just start importing these programs because it would be cheaper than making programs in-house, like shows like Road Rovers and Freakazoid. So they just started importing programs, and as they started importing programs, it first started with Pokemon, and as we started to see the popularity of Pokemon, we started to see us going from Pokemon to Fox going out here and making a knockoff in Digimon. Now, Digimon did come first before Pokemon, but like GoBots and Transformers, we started to see a completely a different thing because the phenomenon was Pokemon because it was the first to come to the States. Meanwhile, Digimon, which had a much better story, basically wound up in the annals of obscurity after 3 seasons, basically came and went. And after Digimon came and went, we started to see a resurgence of another cartoon on, I believe, the 4Kids TV for Fox. It was Transformers Robots in Disguise. I remember that cartoon coming on on the weekdays, and that basically was the cartoon that gave us the Super Fire Convoy, or the Optimus Prime in a cartoon for the first time. And that cartoon, Transformers Robots in Disguise, basically, which was called Transformers Car Robots in Japan, basically revived interest in Transformers after Beast Wars wound up ending, I think, in 1999, because I remember when Beast Wars ended after the Beast Wars and the Beast Machines, really was 98 actually, this is where they brought in the Robots in Disguise cartoon, and as they brought in the Robots in Disguise cartoon. It basically was, again, brought over as related to Transformers and brought back interest in Transformers. And that anime, again, was brought over, I think, around 2000, 2001. And this was the start of the rise of anime. But this era of anime is very different than the era of anime from the 70s to the early 2000s, because from the 70s to the 2000s we got a variety of content. We would get anime series, but we would also get anime full feature films. That was a big thing from the 70s to about, I would say, the early 2000s, because I remember there being, again, the movies like Golgo 13, The Hitman, and movies like Ghost in the Shell. Anime studios used to go out here and make a lot of full feature movies, but the 2000s were basically known for their television series, and their television series was a part of their business. Again, starting with cartoons like Pokemon, Digimon, and Transformers Robots in Disguise, that basically opened the door for anime to come in and be the major part of the network, become the major part of WB, which is Channel 11 here in New York, and Channel 5 here in New York as well. When they replaced their Fox Kids and Kids WB blocks, they replaced them starting with Pokemon, Digimon, Transformers Robots in Disguise. Then they expanded into cartoons like One Piece. I remember One Piece being on the air during the early 2000s, and I also remember other more obscure cartoons like Medabots, which basically was a mixture of Transformers and Pokemon. Medabots was on for quite some time. I think it ran about 2 or 3 seasons. And then we got other cartoons like Monster Rancher. I remember that cartoon being on the air for a while. And I also remember shows like the show based on the toys of Beyblade. Again, another glorified toy commercial. And I also remember one of my favorite cartoons in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically reminded me so much of guys in the barbershop talking trash as they was playing spades in the back while they were cutting heads in the front. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was one of my favorite cartoons because I loved how they talked about the Dark Magician with the attack points and the defense points and these just elaborate things that they talked about as related to the anime, to that anime, and it was just a fun show. Again, Yu-Gi-Oh! Further expanded into Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and then expanded, I think, into another one. Same thing with Pokemon, where Pokemon went from Pokemon Classic, which featured Ash, Misty, and Brock, to featuring a new cast with Ash and Brock in the Johto Adventures and another character, May. And then as that evolved, we got more new characters added. And the same thing happened to many of these cartoons. You would see, again, different characters as related to them. And I remember obscure cartoons like The Shaman King. And again, The Shaman King was a cartoon that just kind of came and went one season. I mean, with a lot of these animes, they would come and go as related to television. And I also remember some shows that were on cable that I believe one of my Facebook friends would definitely know. There was a show called Yu Yu Hakusho. I remember seeing the toys for those for those in the store. Yu Yu Hakusho was a big show back in the early 2000s. And I also remember another show, Baki the Grappler, having toys in the store, and I remember seeing a guy named Double Dealer make a custom of Wolverine from one of those because it had the forward shoulder joints. And he basically took this Baki the Grappler figure and rebuilt it into Wolverine. So I remember those toys in the store and the Baki the Grappler show being on in cable. That was one of the more adult themed shows, similar to Yu Yu Hakusho. That was more adult themed all around. And I also remember some people talking about Bleach. I mean, Bleach was a big show in the 2000s. I mean, Bleach had multiple seasons and was one of those big epic sagas. It was really one of those big epic sagas out here as related to things. And I also remember a lot of kids talking about Dragon Ball Z. My cousin would talk about Dragon Ball when he first visited me in 2000 and 2001. He gave me some tapes of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z as related to the Cell saga and related to the Buu saga. I mean, he gave me the cartoons of those things because, again, anime was really, again, more series focused in the 2000s. It wasn't really a lot of movies going on. Now, I know that there were some movies. I think Spirited Away came out. I have to go check on that. Miyazaki was still making movies, but the main focus was usually just animated series. And again, these animated series usually oftentimes coincided with Japanese toy lines, which were imported to the US and then sold at places like KB toy stores along with the cards. A lot of kids would go to KB toy stores back in the 2000s. They would buy the toys, they would go buy the cards, and like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, because I had a family member who was a teacher. She talked to me about all of this going on. And again, it was a heavy focus on anime and anime-related characters as related to things, because many of the TV networks really didn't want to spend the money. They really didn't want to spend the money on these types of animated programming as related to their platforms because it was getting really expensive. And so what they would do is import these cartoons of these different shows. I mean, I don't know if Winx Club is an anime series, but it was a big series with a lot of girls in the 2000s. I don't know if it was big because that was also another cartoon that was on as a part of the 4Kids TV block. So there was a whole lot of cartoons like Sailor Moon and many others that were a part of this block. I mean, so many great cartoons for the kids of that era. I mean, I was a guy who grew up in the 90s. My thing was shows like Gargoyles and Batman and the animated series. I mean, I was in my teen years, back in my early 20s back then. I used to like watching those shows, but there were a whole lot of shows that basically don't even get talked about, like Spider Riders. Again, they would just come and go. I mean, when it came down to all of this anime, again, you would see so many different shows that would just come and go as part of the 4Kids TV block and part of the cable block. And that's what made it very different than the 80s, from the 70s to the late 90s, early 2000. I mean, anime was completely different. And again, a lot of this anime basically was adapted from the mangas that were in many Japanese comic shops and many import shops. I mean, a lot of those were turned into cartoons because the mangas were very popular. I mean, Dragon Ball came from a manga. One Piece came from a manga. I believe Digimon was a manga as well. And Bleach was a manga. And again, all of these came from manga, and now the mangas became anime. And that's just, again, what's par for the course, because when it comes down to entertainment, again, in Japan, they look to make stuff that they can merchandise, and the animes basically usually come from mangas they can merchandise, and that what they're doing is adapting that material so they can maximize profits as related to things. And again, the American audience basically is the gravy because they've already made the money off the Japanese audience. So when it comes to this anime, again, this anime is something that, again, goes from decade to decade, but I would really wish that I could see more feature films, because that's where I believe the Japanese animation really has strong dominance, because they have much more richer, more complex storytelling when they get into movies like Ghost in the Shell or Golgo 13, The Hitman. Really, when you start to watch the anime movies, that's where it really shines. And I wish that in the 2000s there was more focus on feature films, because feature films, again, or where you can tell a richer story. Now, there was more, again, focus on merchandising and stories as in the 2000s than there was in art form. I mean, from the 70s to the year 2000, there was more focus on the art and focus on, you know, the artistic merits of the storytelling. That was one of the advantages of anime, but I see them, again, going for the merchandising in the 2000s. That's based on what little I know. Again, this was not an era where I was heavy focused on things, because You know, I was again going through this really rough period again after losing the position at AmeriCorps and being told that was no place for me in the organization. Then 9/11 happened. Then I wound up losing a job after 2 weeks, and then I had lost the job at the city college. So it was a rough period in my life. So I don't know much about anime, but I will try to again talk about what little I know. And what little I know is that from what I saw walking around in places like the Manhattan Mall and watching TV all around and reading magazines, I saw more of a focus on serialized stories based on mangas, serialized stories that were turned into animes. That's basically what I saw most of the time. And that serialization is still going on right now, and that importing of those cartoons. We used to have a lot of these cartoons on Tubi. There was a heavy saturation of anime on Tubi, where you could watch a lot of these shows for free. I mean, I was able to watch Go-Go 13 and Ghost in the Shell on Tubi, and there were a couple of other TV series here and there. But the whole thing is that there's a lot of great anime out there, and you guys can just go check it out. Go check out all this fantastic anime that's on many platforms. Again, Tubi has a lot of this stuff for free, and you can watch as much of it as you like and learn all about how a lot of these shows came from their manga roots and turned into really great and fun, compelling programs for many of the millennials and Gen Z who grew up on anime in the 2000s. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can send a donation for a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. And if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And if you want to check out my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find that comic on Lulu.com right now in paperback for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to check out my first full digital comic, A Steam No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for just 99 cents. And you can check out that Esteem story in the paperback in the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past. Now, I'd love to do my next comic, but I can't do that without your help. So if you want to drop a donation to help me to be able to make the ISIS graphic novel I wanted to do after I did Esteem No Good Deed and John Haynes at Death's Door, you can do that as well. Or you can pick up some of the great books on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella series, and other books like The Thetas and Eternal Night. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this requested video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Blue Way in this all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.